Frequencies and rhythms are the same thing. So when you do something frequently over a period of time, that becomes your frequency. If you were to take a rhythm and you were to play it consistently, and then you were to play another rhythm on top of that rhythm, a polyrhythm, if you will, and you sped that up and sped it up and sped it up and sped it up, it would become a pitch. It would become the same thing as a frequency. It would become a note, because that's all frequencies are. They're a specific vibration and a specific bandwidth. Now, the reason that most of the world is living in a state of separation is because most people live within their bottom three chakras. So the chakras, each one of them is a spinning wheel, and they're all responsible for different frequencies within us. So if you were to think of a fully awakened and balanced being, it would be these several different bandwidths of frequencies that are all playing out in a way that it makes a chord that is hopefully a consonant chord, right? A harmonious chord that would actually be more powerful in itself. It's not contradicting with itself. So with people that are in these lower bandwidths of frequencies, they're experiencing a slower bandwidth, right? The lower you get in frequency, the wider the waves become, and there's more separation. There is a larger interval between each section of the waveform. All right, now I'm going to insert a clip right here just to show you all a demonstration of how rhythm and pitch are essentially the same thing. Some of you probably already know this, but rhythm, when sped up, becomes pitch. And I kind of wanted to see the relationship between the pitch of these. So at the beginning here, this is just a demonstration of that. This is a very simple 3/4 rhythm. So I'm taking a defined space and putting 3 notes in it, and then putting 4 notes in that same defined space. So you get a polyrhythm. And then when I speed that up, it turns into a pitch. Okay, so now that you've seen that, let's talk about the idea of the 144. You've all probably heard this concept of like the 144,000 souls that are going to come down to the earth, and they're here to shift things, right? The planetary mission. But what most people get wrong about this idea is that 144 was a quantity of souls, when 144,000 hertz is what we're actually looking at. It is a frequency, it is a bandwidth, and that happens to be the same bandwidth, if not a similar bandwidth, of the crown chakra. So this is simply talking about souls that are able to activate their higher energy centers. Because what this passage is essentially saying is that what's going to be required in order to actually unify the large, wide bandwidths that are keeping us divided here is going to be 144,000 hertz. So once we get to that, if you're to think about this, the higher you go in frequency, the closer the intervals get together. So the notes, the intervals between notes are going to get closer and closer together because the bandwidths are getting smaller. They're getting more unified. So they're closer together physically, like in a very literal sense, than a lower frequency is. Now this goes on infinitely. It's going to go on beyond what our senses can perceive, because the same way that we perceive physicality, that's a specific bandwidth of frequency. The same way that we hear certain things, that's a specific bandwidth of frequency. And we continue to speed that up, then we see things that can't be heard, right? What we're visually seeing are sounds that are sped up so fast that it's picked up as light by our eyes instead of vibrations by our ears. So that's the bandwidth being demonstrated in very physical reality. But once we get to a certain point, this can just keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and it goes on infinitely. But what this passage was saying was that 144,000 connecting to that frequency is actually what we need to unify this space. Sure, we could go on past that, but that's the idea, my friends. This is about raising your frequency and raising your consciousness, because while most people are stuck in these lower bandwidths of their lower chakras, and they're literally perceiving reality in a lesser bandwidth. Now think also bandwidth about how information passes, right? If you have a Wi-Fi signal on your phone that's like 1 gigabyte versus 5 gigabyte, there's a lot less data transfer happening because it's a less dense waveform. In other words, the waveforms are further apart. That essentially means that what we're perceiving when we open up the higher chakras are higher bandwidths of information. We're receiving greater frequencies that are actually going to put us on a path of our frequency becoming something that is aligned with that. Now, my friends, this isn't about being perfect, but this is about getting into rhythm and getting in tune with these higher bandwidths. Because the more that we tune in with these higher bandwidths, the more that we actually become a proponent of what those bandwidths are built on. It is a frequency, my friends, that exists within us. It is not something that's saying like, you're the chosen one and these people are not. It's simply saying that souls that can reach this frequency, souls that can tap in and touch this frequency of 144,000 hertz are the ones that can actually be here and bring this change that's going to be needed in order to bring this planet into a unified state. So with that, I hope you realize that you're not waiting to be chosen by something. You're not waiting around for something to descend down to the earth and save everybody. What that thing is a frequency that is already here. And you can tap into it if you choose to. Because it's all about awareness. Even these people that are stuck in their bottom 3 chakras, they have the ability to tap into a higher center. It's going to take time to always adjust to higher frequencies. Maybe they get into their heart frequency next, or their throat chakra, or something like that. They're able to tap into higher frequencies if they're willing to become self-aware. But remember that the information at these lower levels flows much slower. It's much more dense. Some types of information, even what I'm communicating to you right now, might not be perceivable by someone who cannot uphold at least a certain level of bandwidth. So my friends, the way that we manifest this and the way that we bring this forward with whatever makes us unique is how we're actually going to reach more people. Because truth in itself is a frequency. So essentially, people have something called sympathetic resonance that exists within them. And what sympathetic resonance is say I have an instrument in my room, like an acoustic instrument, like a guitar or something, and I were to sit over here and I were to sing a note, and that note were to be close to the pitch of a certain string on that guitar, that string would resonate with the frequency going through the air and it would make the instrument vibrate, even subtly. This is called sympathetic resonance, because essentially it means that if you strike a chord within somebody, very literally, if you strike a chord within somebody, if you say something, or if you bring something forward, if you make some kind of art or some kind of painting or something, and somebody that's on a lower bandwidth somehow perceives that it strikes a chord with them that maybe resonates with a higher center, what you're doing is you're giving that person a gateway to actually access higher frequencies. Now, of course, it is the individual's choice to actually explore that further. But when those chords are struck enough and the individual has an open enough perspective to actually look into these things and actually connect with them and feel them however they know how to, what they're doing is creating a foundation for them to be able to experience higher and higher bandwidths of frequencies. This is in fact how we all level up. This is how it happens, because nobody starts being fully activated and fully aware and fully resonant with these higher frequencies. We go through a process of awakening, and often it's somebody says something to you and you think, oh, and then you start thinking about that, and then you go down a rabbit hole with that, or you hear some kind of music and it makes you feel a certain way and it does a certain something to you where you start feeling new things that you hadn't felt before, or you start thinking new thoughts that you hadn't thought before. But it's this gradual process of the frequency going higher and higher. This also relates to how we alchemize frequencies within ourselves in order to make ourselves light, in order to tune more into what's higher, because the more conscious we get, in other words, the higher those bandwidths get, the more bandwidth we can receive and we can process. So we're actually living in a world where there's higher information available to us, right? So with that, my friends, recognize too that time is a frequency. Time is not something that is linear in the way that we perceive it, but the future is a higher frequency than the past, because there is an absolute future that I'm not going to say how far away it is, because that's the linear thinking, but there is an absolute future in which everything is unified. And that absolute future of everything being unified is something that can be tapped into. That's what the 144,000 is. It is the absolute future of everything being unified. So when you can tap into these higher frequencies, you're receiving information that is quite literally the future. You're bringing the future here instead of lagging behind in the slow, dense energies that are the past, all right? Now, don't confuse these slow, dense energies for they're the bad energies and these fast ones are the good energies. We need foundations, right? what happens is these high frequencies are going to come in as this potent information, and then they're going to travel down and be solidified into this. And that's how the matrix essentially gets rebuilt. That's how things become solid, and they become the solid foundation beneath us. At one point, the very earth itself was something that was not matter, right? Think about that. But something had to crystallize that frequency into something to where we now perceive it as physical. We have these physical footholds. So it's about taking these frequencies and grounding them into yourself, and then grounding them into the world by communicating, by sending out that frequency into the world in whatever way that you choose to do so. So my friends, like I said, you're the chosen one if you choose yourself. You're not waiting to be chosen by something, and if someone tells you they're a chosen one, you should follow them, and you're not the chosen one. They don't know what's going on. It's all the frequency, my friends, and we are literally like antennas that can tune to different frequencies when we get deeper into our consciousness. When we go through processes of meditating and sitting and just detaching and allowing the vibration to float higher, and then just seeing how much of that we can actually handle, we gain a sort of tolerance to it. I don't know if tolerance is the best word, but it's kind of like how if you were to go to the gym and you were to do strength training, you're going to get better, you're going to get stronger if you do a motion consistently. Your body's going to adapt to it, and your muscles are then going to be able to handle, they're going to have the capacity, they're going to adapt, that's a better way to put it, they're going to adapt to the capacity that you can actually train them to. So the same thing with frequency. Some people, if you get them into even the heart space or throat space, they're like, whoa, I'm ungrounded, I'm freaking out. And that's because they're not used to those higher frequencies. This would be the same thing that if you were to take a human that has never been in an astral space before, like an out-of-body situation, and put them into all sorts of things, we would find things that could be very overwhelming to us. So like I said, 144,000 is not the top. But in terms of what is necessary to be the top in this physical reality, that's what it is. It goes on infinitely from there. So my friends, give yourselves time to acclimate and actually build that capacity to be able to carry a higher frequency just naturally. Because what you anchor in becomes your new baseline eventually. And then you're no longer going to reside in the lower frequencies. You can then reside in a higher frequency and still be very firmly grounded in yourself. And that's how we level up. That's how we become more conscious. That's how we expand. All right, my friends? So with that, be whole, be well. If you found this video valuable or interesting or anything, like, subscribe, feel free to comment. I'd love to hear from you. And be well, my friends. Take care. We'll talk soon.